welcome to The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. Migrants are dying at numbers never seen before at the Border Patrol's El Paso sector. That's the area surrounding El Paso, Texas, and Juarez, Mexico. 148 migrants lost their lives there in the year ending September 30th. It's a huge surge from 6 migrant deaths recorded in 2017. In response to the immigration crisis, officials in the U.S. and Mexico are doubling down on increasingly restrictive, often cruel border policies, while climate change is pushing borderland temperatures to deadly heights. Migrants are now facing intensifying risks at what the United Nations has deemed the world's most dangerous border. USA Today immigration reporter Lauren Villagran joins us now to talk about her reporting in a year-long El Paso Times investigation that found officials ill-equipped to respond to the crisis. Lauren, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So what did your investigation uncover about the failures and gaps in the response on the part of local government agencies here in the U.S.?
Well, Dana, it was a really shocking year here in the El Paso region. It started in March when a fire inside a migrant detention center on the Mexican side of the border in Ciudad Juarez killed 40 men. And at the El Paso Times, we wanted to look at that issue. But as the summer progressed, with temperatures in at record levels here in El Paso, we were seeing, 44 straight days of temperatures above 100 degrees. Migrants began dying in the desert here in a way that we had never seen before. I think listeners and viewers are familiar with the issues that Arizona has faced, where their hotter desert has killed hundreds of migrants over the years, but El Paso had seen nothing like it. And in the course of investigating these deaths, we realized that the community was really unprepared both to count appropriately the number of people who are dying and to address the problem. For example, the local police do not record when a body is recovered or there's a death investigation that it's migration related. The sheriff's office, the county medical examiner also doesn't keep track of migrant deaths. And after the year that we had here, I expect that, there's going to be calls for some change.
So how is the U.S. tracking migrant deaths?
There have been some best practices developed in Arizona, which has been wrestling with this issue for more than a decade. The Pima County Medical Examiner near the border works in concert with a nonprofit called Humane Borders, Inc., both to map and track migrant deaths, not only so that folks can understand the public policy issue, but also so that the families of those who are lost have a resource to go and see if their loved one is on the list of migrants who have died.
So, Lauren, what are the obstacles that stand in the way of presenting really a full picture of what's happening?
Well, for one, the different agencies are tracking migrant deaths in different ways or not tracking them at all. For example, the New Mexico Office of the Medical Investigator this year created a new checkbox called, quote unquote, probable border crosser to try to get a handle on the issue, given that so many of the deaths occurred on the southern New Mexico side of the state line. You have agencies like El Paso Police and the El Paso County Medical Examiner that don't track migrant deaths at all. There will be clues sometimes in their reports. For example, I saw one police report that talked about 2 pedestrians running across the border highway. And when one was hit and killed, the other continued north. That's a clue that those folks could have been migrating. But there's nothing to specifically track it. The Border Patrol does have this missing migrant program, but it is not exhaustive, in part because local agencies count it differently.
Well, can you share a specific story of one migrant that you came across in your reporting?
Sure. I met with one man, a guy named Randy Island, who had retired to a sort of ranch home just outside the city limits. And, one Sunday morning, he was out exercising his horses when he saw, red and blue flashing lights at his front gate. He came down the mesa to check out to see what had gone on, if a neighbor was in trouble, and saw a woman slumped against a fence, and she was a migrant. She had simply sat down or collapsed and died. I read numerous sheriff's deputy and police reports that described their attempts to go out to a body recovery. Often it's Border Patrol agents that are coming across a body in the desert as they try to intercept migrants who are crossing unlawfully in this region. And the conditions were just awful, Dana. People were truly within reach of a glass of water or a good Samaritan. And, I think it's just heartbreaking, both for the border agents that are working this area, as well as the community that lives, works, and goes to school here.
It absolutely is. We wrote that there's been this seismic shift in U.S. immigration policy this year. Can you detail that shift for us? And is that what's behind the increase in deaths?
So you mentioned seismic shifts in immigration policy, and we did see really an overhaul of migration policies from the executive branch, from the Biden administration this year. That included ending the Title 42 expulsions and replacing that with both carrots and sticks. On the one hand, there are new legal pathways available to many migrants to, for example, make an appointment to present at a port of entry, which is a much safer option. It does not guarantee entry or immigration relief, but it is an opportunity to present at the border to seek asylum or another immigration pathway. At the same time, there were rules put in place requiring folks to seek asylum in a third country before they arrive at the U.S. border, which could make ineligible some migrant groups. But many of the people dying, Dana, are from Mexico or Central America, including Guatemala. We don't have a read of everyone's nationality, in part because folks, when they're crossing, trying to evade apprehension, often aren't carrying identification. So there is a gap in the data. But if folks are crossing this way, it may be because either they are unaware of a legal pathway available to them, or they believe they don't qualify. And in some cases, there are folks who may not qualify because they've been deported before, or they could have a criminal background. There's a lot of different things in the mix.
So Texas Governor Greg Abbott, his Operation Lone Star, it's rooted in deterrence. How has he responded to your reporting?
We reached out to Texas Governor Greg Abbott for an interview. He declined. He did send a statement through a spokesperson. Governor Abbott blames the Biden administration for what he calls, quote unquote, chaos at the border, and also lays blame for migrant deaths on the administration's shoulders.
Well, 5 years ago, Border Patrol established an initiative called the Missing Migrant Program, and the idea was to improve the agency's ability to rescue migrants in crisis. How's that been working?
The Border Patrol's Missing Migrant Program first starts with increasing rescues, and they've increased rescues by the hundreds. There are teams that go out and look for migrants when there is a report made. Sometimes that report will come from an agent, his or herself, but it may also come from a family member. Sometimes migrants are carrying their phones. They reach out when they're in distress. Family members call 911 or reach out to the Border Patrol, and the Border Patrol is now making every effort to rescue people. They've also installed rescue beacons in key migration pathways so that a migrant, if they don't have a cell phone or a battery or they're in distress, can basically press a button and the Border Patrol can respond to that location as quickly as possible. In this region, I know the border agents are working very hard. We spoke at length with them and rode along as they talked about, their emergency rescues, as well as with local fire departments and other first responders. The effort is immense. But again, Dana, some of these locations, even though they may be quote unquote near neighborhoods, a mile in, they're in sand dunes. I mean, there's no roads. So it can be very difficult to get to a person in time. And often migrants aren't reaching out until it's too late.
Well, you've touched on this, Lauren, but can you talk a little bit more about the impact the increase in migrant deaths has had on the people who live in El Paso?
This is a community that is an immigrant majority community. Many residents here in El Paso can trace their own migration stories to their parents, grandparents, or great-grandparents. And so there's, a real empathy, I think, for people who are seeking a better life. At the same time, it's tragic. And I think that it affects people here, right? During the earlier part of the year when Title 42 was about to expire, there were so many people trying to come through the El Paso Juarez corridor. It's jarring for the community. And being a border community here on the US-Mexico border, what I hear over and over again is that folks want to see Congress take action.
Well, your reporting on this has been extensive. What do you want people who are listening to this interview to take away from this?
As journalists, Dana, what we try to always do, right, is to shed light on an issue where there has been some darkness. And I know that in the course of reporting this, every time I placed that phone call to say, hey, did you know that this many people were dying in this area? Certainly first responders would say to me, we want people to know what's going on here. Border Patrol agents would say to me, there isn't enough coverage of this issue. People don't understand how dangerous it is out there. I know that first responders and border agents want that message to go out to migrants themselves so that they understand the risks that they're facing, because they often do not. And I think that, folks in the immigrant advocacy community, want to better understand the issue to find out how best to address it. As journalists, again, when we try to shed some light on these sorts of issues, it's in order to inform public policy. So, I do hope that folks, read these stories, share these stories. The people who are dying are not just migrants. They are brothers, husbands, spouses, wives, daughters, people who have family somewhere who were depending on them. They're real people, and they're dying in perhaps the most tragic way possible, alone in the desert, often from heat, or in a river from drowning. So folks here who understand the dangers want people in their home countries to understand what they could face, and seek those legal pathways that may be available to them.
Lauren, I can't thank you enough for being on the show.
Thanks, Dana. I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.